Okay, so you know that feeling, right? You open the fridge, you've got like some random leftovers, half an onion, a jar of something that expired 3 months ago, and you're thinking, if only Gordon Ramsay could just beam into my kitchen and tell me what to make with this.
Oh, yeah, totally. That's like the universal struggle. But what if you could get, well, not Ramsey exactly, but some serious AI help?
That's actually what we're diving into today, this AWS tutorial that walks you through making an app, a serverless one, that takes your jumbled up ingredients and spits out recipe suggestions.
And when they say serverless, that's a whole rabbit hole in itself.
Right.
But super interesting for anyone who's, even a little bit curious about how cloud stuff actually works.
It's like magic, but the very practical kind of magic. So for this deep dive, we're looking at build a serverless web application using generative AI. The title kind of says it all.
It really does. And I think for anyone listening who's maybe built a website or tinkered with some code, this is a perfect example of how things are changing. Like even 5 years ago, an app with AI built in, that was for the big guys. Now it's getting democratized.
Totally. So our mission today is to, well, maybe not become coding losers instantly, but to understand what makes this app tick. What are the pieces? How do they fit together?
Yeah.
And how can we, as learners, start wrapping our heads around concepts like serverless and generative AI?
And let's not forget, this is a super real world example, right? Everyone eats. Everyone's opened the fridge and felt that despair. So this isn't just theoretical tech jargon.
Yeah, this is about solving dinner with AI, which I kind of love.
Me too. Okay, so can we talk about that serverless thing first? Because it's kind of misleading, right? It's not like the servers vanish into thin air.
Right. It's more about who's responsible for them,
Yes.
or rather, who isn't responsible.
Exactly. So traditionally, you wanted to build something online, you needed servers, you had to like buy or rent them, set them up, make sure they didn't crash in the middle of the night. It was a whole thing.
Yeah, a whole headache.
Yeah.
But with serverless, AWS, in this case, takes care of all that behind-the-scenes stuff. They manage the servers. They handle scaling if your app suddenly gets popular.
You, as the developer, you're basically just writing the code for what your app does, the actual functionality. And then AWS is like the invisible stage crew making sure the show runs smoothly.
So that frees you up to, I guess, be more creative, focus on the user experience and stuff like that.
Exactly. And that's where the aha moments come in. Because when you realize that you don't have to be a sysadmin and a coder, it opens up what's possible, especially for people who are just starting out.
So enough about service. Let's get to the tasty part. This app, at its core, what happens when someone uses it? They go to the website, and then what?
So there's a simple form, right? You literally type in, I've got chicken, broccoli, soy sauce, or whatever your culinary chaos looks like.
And the app doesn't judge you for that 3-week-old yogurt lurking in the back.
No judgment. It just takes that input, that ingredient list, and it sends it off to the AI brains of the operation.
So behind the scenes, we've got this HTML-based user interface that's just a fancy way of saying the web page. And it's talking to this back-end system.
And that back end is where things get really interesting. Because it's not just storing data, it's calling upon the power of Amazon Bedrock and a specific AI model, Claude 3 Sonnet, to work its magic.
Hold up. Amazon Bedrock. For someone who's like AI curious but not an expert, what is that?
Imagine like the ultimate AI toolkit, right? Amazon's created this platform where they've gathered all these amazing generative AI models, and they're letting developers access them easily. It's like a one-stop shop.
So instead of having to go and like build your own AI from scratch,
Right.
which is probably impossible for most of us, you're using these pre-trained, super powerful models.
Exactly. And Claude 3 Sonnet, that's one of the stars of the show. It's like the poet of the AI world. It can understand language, context, generate creative text formats, perfect for recipe creation.
So it takes your ingredient list, whips up some culinary masterpiece instructions, and sends it back to the user. But how do we actually build this thing? What does the tutorial guide us through?
Okay, so first off, you're going to learn how to use AWS Amplify to host your front end. Think of Amplify as your all-in-one web app toolbox. Hosting, user management, connecting to the back end, it's got it all.
So Amplify makes deploying that web page super easy. What else?
Then there's continuous deployment. Now imagine this. Every time you tweak your website code, even a little bit, it automatically updates live. No more messing around with FTP or anything. Just push your changes and boom, they're live.
Super efficient. And I think for anyone who's used to the old school way of doing things, that alone is mind-blowing. What about user management? Does this app require people to log in to get their recipe fix?
Not necessarily in this case, but you'll still learn about Amplify Auth. Now, this is less about users logging in and more about making sure only authorized parts of your app can talk to, say, Amazon Bedrock.
So it's like internal security,
Hmm.
making sure the AI isn't giving away recipes to just anyone.
Right. It's all about access control.
Huh.
Then the big one. Building the serverless backend itself. This is the heart of the operation, where the magic happens.
And this is where things like AWS Lambda come in, right?
Exactly. Lambda lets you run code without worrying about the servers underneath. It's serverless compute at its finest. Your code gets triggered by an event, in this case, someone submitting their ingredient list, and it spins up, does its thing, then disappears. You're only charged for the tiny fraction of time it's actually running.
So efficient.
Hmm.
But how does the website actually talk to this backend? We need some kind of communication channel, right?
That's where Amplify data comes in. It acts as a bridge, letting your front-end code easily interact with the serverless backend. It uses a technology called GraphQL, which is all about asking for specific data, nothing more, nothing less, super efficient.
And finally, we're connecting the front end to the back end. This is like the last puzzle piece.
Exactly. Making sure that when someone types in leftover turkey, cranberry sauce, and despair, the website knows how to send that to the backend and then display the AI-generated culinary salvation beautifully.
Okay, so before someone jumps into this tutorial,
Hmm.
what are the must-haves? What do they need before they even start?
Well, first things first, an AWS account. Can't really play in the AWS sandbox without one. The tutorial does guide you through setting one up, though.
So step one, get yourself an AWS playground. What else?
Then you got to make sure your AWS profile is configured properly. This is all about your local computer being able to securely connect to your AWS account up in the cloud.
Makes sense. We need a secure line between our coding layer and the AWS mothership. Anything else? Special software.
You'll need Node.js and NPM. Those are kind of essential for modern web dev, especially if you're working with JavaScript. They let you run JavaScript code and manage all the different libraries and dependencies your project needs.
So while the tutorial says it's for AWS beginners, some basic web dev knowledge, maybe a little JavaScript, would probably be helpful.
Yeah, it wouldn't hurt. The tutorial also mentions Git and GitHub. Gets like version control for your code. It keeps track of all the changes, who made them, and when. Really useful for collaboration and for not accidentally breaking your entire project.
And GitHub is where you store these Git repositories. And this is important because
AWS Amplify, specifically its continuous deployment feature, often works with GitHub. So every time you push code changes to your GitHub repo, Amplify can automatically update your live website. It's like magic.
magic indeed. And the tutorial also tells you how long all this should take.
Right.
Right. And any potential costs.
Yep, it's designed for beginners to AWS, an estimate it'll take about 35 minutes. As for cost, the resources used are generally eligible for the AWS free tier, so you can learn and experiment without worrying about breaking the bank.
That's huge for learners. Okay, so we're not just clicking random buttons in the AWS console. What specific AWS services are we actually using to build this app?
The big one is AWS Amplify, which is this awesome toolkit for building web and mobile apps. It takes care of so much, including hosting your front end, managing users, and connecting to the back end. It even utilizes AWS Cognito, which is a service for securely managing user identities and authentication. It's like the bouncer for your app.
So Amplify is like the general contractor overseeing the whole project. What other services are involved in this construction?
Then we've got AWS AppSync, which is a managed GraphQL service that lets you easily build flexible APIs. GraphQL lets the front end ask for exactly the data it needs, which is super efficient. And of course, there's AWS Lambda, which provides the serverless compute power we need. This is where the actual code for processing ingredients and calling the AI model will run, but without you having to manage servers. Finally, and this is the star of the show, there's Amazon Bedrock, which is our gateway to that Claude 3 Sonnet AI model where the recipe magic actually happens.
So a whole team of specialized AWS services working together. And it looks like the tutorial's recently been updated, right?
Yeah, last updated July 19, 2024, which gives us some confidence that we're working with the latest and greatest information. Nothing worse than following a tutorial that's outdated.
Totally agree. Okay, let's zoom out for a second. Big picture view.
No.
How do all these AWS services actually connect and work together?
Picture this. You're on the website, you type in your ingredients, and hit submit. That data gets sent to the backend, likely via Amplify data, using a GraphQL API powered by AWS AppSync.
And that backend, that's probably running on AWS Lambda, right? Where the code does its thing.
You got it. That Lambda function takes your ingredients, calls upon Amazon Bedrock to access the Claude 3 Sonnet AI, and says, hey, AI, work your magic.
And then Claude 3 Sonnet whips up the recipe, sends it back to Lambda through AppSync and amplified data, and finally back to your screen. It's like a super fast relay race.
Exactly. But instead of runners, it's these managed cloud services, each handling a specific leg of the race. And the beauty of this is scalability. If your app suddenly gets featured on, like, the Food Network or something.
Then AWS just handles the increased traffic automatically, right? You don't have to scramble to buy more servers or anything.
Exactly. It scales up and down as needed, and you only pay for what you actually use. It's the beauty of serverless.
Okay, we have the high-level architecture. Let's break down the actual steps in the tutorial. It's like there are 6 main tasks.
The first one is host a static website. This is about using Amplify to get your front-end files, your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript out there on the web. It's also where you set up that awesome continuous deployment feature.
So you get the website up and running, and any changes you make get pushed live automatically. Super smooth. What's task 2?
Manage users.
Yeah.
But as we discussed, this is less about people logging in and more about setting up Amplify auth to control access to the backend, especially that connection to Amazon Bedrock.
Right, so it's internal security, making sure things are locked down tight. Task 3, build a serverless backend. This is where we get down to business.
Yep, this is where you define the API, probably using GraphQL with AWS AppSync, and you write the code that will run in AWS Lambda to process those ingredient lists and call the AI. This one takes the longest, estimated at about 10 minutes.
Okay, so the backend is ready to go, but the front end needs to be able to communicate with it. That's task 4. Call the API from the static website.
This is where Amplify data comes back in. The tutorial teaches you how to use it to write JavaScript code that can send ingredients to the backend and then receive the AI-generated recipe. It's like building a bridge between your website and the serverless magic.
And then we're on to task 5, build the front end. Didn't we already do that in task 1?
Good catch. Task 1 was about hosting the basic files, the structure of your website. Task 5 is where you add interactivity, the input fields, the submit button, the area where the recipe gets displayed. It's like turning a static storefront into a functioning shop.
And finally, task 6, clean up resources. This is always important in the cloud world.
Absolutely crucial. This is where you learn how to shut everything down properly so you don't accidentally rack up charges, especially once you're outside the free tier. Being responsible cloud citizens.
So there you have it, a complete recipe for building a serverless, AI-powered recipe app. We've covered the ingredients, the steps, and even a bit of cleanup.
And for anyone listening, I think the key takeaway here is that building sophisticated AI applications is becoming more and more accessible. With services like AWS Amplify and Bedrock, a lot of the heavy lifting is taken care of, letting you focus on the creative part.
Totally. So you've learned how to build a modern, serverless web app using generative AI to solve that age-old problem of figuring out what to make for dinner. But the bigger picture is the potential here, right? This is just one example.
Exactly. Think about all the other daily tasks, the little annoyances, the things we wish were just a bit easier. Can you apply this serverless, AI-powered approach to other problems? What kind of personalized apps could you imagine building?
The possibilities are pretty much endless, especially as AI keeps getting more and more powerful. And the world of cloud computing is always changing, so understanding these core concepts, serverless architecture, and generative AI is going to be key to navigating what comes next. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.